Right, a big week. PM, of course, 2 hours away now from his bilat with President Xi. Israel's ground offensive in Gaza well underway. The RBA under pressure tomorrow. It's the Melbourne Cup meeting to hike interest rates. Inflation, of course, continuing to cause concern. A whole lot to get to, and that Newspoll as well. Joining me now, the Australian's national editor, Mr Shanahan. Dennis, welcome. Great to have you as always. We'll get to all of that international news in a moment, but I really want to get across what's playing out locally, because I think it's critically important. We're now a few weeks away from the Voice result, emphatic result. It's starting to me to look like it's showing up in Newspoll. Pretty interesting reading there, worrying reading if you're a Labor Party member. PM's approvals have fallen sharply in terms of party vote. We've got the coalition now leading Labor on primary, 37 of course to Labor's 35. In part, the PM's not seen as being focused on the issues that matter to voters, but increasingly what he is focused on, things like the Voice and all these trips overseas, as important as they might be to Canberra, they're not helping them because he's coming across as being out of touch. What do you think, Dennis?
Yes, the problem for Anthony Albanese is that he's being seen as being out of touch and out of the country. Clearly, the massive Voice defeat is now feeding through to the Labor Party's own support, and particularly to Anthony Albanese's personal support. What we're actually seeing now is a rise in competitiveness from Peter Dutton against Anthony Albanese. We've seen some of the biggest falls in voter support for a Prime Minister in a short period on record in the history of Newspoll. And so all of these things are a worry. We saw over the weekend and again this morning, Tanya Plibersek, that powerful performer for the Labor Party, making the point about the importance of leadership. She attacked Peter Dutton and fervently defended Anthony Albanese, saying he's doing a great job talking about his leadership on several different occasions. So I think these are particular problems for Anthony Albanese out of the Voice, but the broader problem for the government is that the Voice has in fact been its agenda for the first half of this election cycle. It is no longer there. It failed. And the only agenda the government has for the future is a negative agenda, unpopular and costly industrial relations reforms, a hugely unpopular energy transition plan led by Chris Bowen, and nothing more positive to come. We've only got 2 weeks of Parliament left this year and probably less than 20 parliamentary sitting weeks before the election is held. Now, this seems incredible, but the government is running out of time. It needs a new agenda, and it needs the Prime Minister in country and on that agenda next year.
I think, you know, what's that saying? Events, dear boys. The problem is the events are overtaking any agenda that they might have. I mean, you can't make a positive agenda out of negative economic news. I read a report, you know, we're talking about tomorrow likely rate rise by the RBA, but I read a report today, if rates do rise, 2 million Australian households, 2 million, they'll be in a negative cash position. I mean, that's diabolical. And you've got the global banking leader, Jamie Dimon, he's the chair of New York's JP Morgan. He is saying, and I quote, the world is facing its worst economic crisis, Dennis, since 1938. Now, it certainly feels like 1938 politically, but if that's where we are economically as well, the times are difficult for the government. And they're not starting from where they should be starting as a first-term government.
No, they're certainly not. And we've seen the IMF warn against the danger of inflation in Australia, point to government spending, particularly on infrastructure, as being the basis of inflationary pressure. And everybody in the street knows what inflationary pressure is meaning, and people who are facing the mortgage increases, rental increases, these are the people who are going to go into the red in their weekly accounts because of interest rate rises. This is a real crisis domestically, But all the portents are there for slowdowns internationally, continuing interruptions to supply chains, and continuing inflation elsewhere, not to mention all the security tensions. Then I think that we are in a very difficult situation, and economically the government is going to be starting from an even worse position if rates go up as expected tomorrow.
I'm going to talk to an expert a little later in the show about the strategic challenge of the China visit. But in political terms, China's not the upside it was for prime ministers in the current climate. I think people are very nervous about China. There's a lot of negative understanding now of the risk China poses, not just to the Pacific, but Chinese hackers, a concern about Chinese CCTV and all the other things that we've had in recent times out of Canberra. How's this going to play out for the Prime Minister, this meeting in Beijing on China's turf? I mean, I argue they should have met in the margins of all these international meetings they're going to anyway. But going over there, I know it's the Gough Whitlam anniversary, but that's Labor's interest, not necessarily the national interest. How do you think this is going to play out for the PM?
Well, I don't think it's playing out very well domestically for the Prime Minister. All this travel, I mean, it looks like he's in the driveway all the time, waiting to be picked up and taken somewhere else.
Isn't it? Rudd-esque.
There is a higher travel rate than Kevin Rudd. And let's remember, Kevin Rudd played up foreign affairs as one of his great strengths. This has not been one of the great strengths previously of Anthony Albanese, and yet he is spending all this time overseas. He is seen to be travelling and, had a sumptuous dinner at the White House, says it was hard work. It's difficult for him. But the problem is this, that there isn't a great deal to show from these trips. He keeps talking about he's now met Joe Biden 9 or 10 times, and he'll meet him again soon. He'll be overseas again, although he is now. And the real problem he has is that he's already given away a great deal to China to ensure that he could make the trip and have the big shaking of the hand with President Xi. We've seen the Port of Darwin decision. Various people have been, released. But Australia also dropped its case against China in the World Trade Organization. This has upset a lot of our trading partners because in return for being relieved of burdens which we shouldn't have had in the first place, we've taken away a real test of China's trading position. And the Prime Minister doesn't seem well prepared. A couple of hours ago, he was asked, did he trust President Xi? This is a couple of hours before he meets him. This was the most obvious question you could ask after President Biden said, don't trust Xi, verify. And the Prime Minister was unable to put together a coherent, strong and confident answer which said, yes, I trust President Xi, but I don't give everything to China without checking. It just seemed like a very poor answer. And I think the optics of this trip, of the Prime Minister standing at a trade fair in Shanghai, holding a lobster and talking about what a great thing this is for Chinese lobster eaters and the lobster industry in Australia, when everyone else in Australia is concerned with the price of fish at the market, not the price of lobster in Shanghai.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I thought Australians are worried about a tin of tuna, and here he is standing with a lobster. There couldn't have been a greater contrast. And you're right to pick up. I don't think he's prepared as he should be for a lot of his press conferences, but that was very telling today, Dennis. We will see what happens. Thank you for your analysis.